That's honestly the question I get the most is when people reach out to me, they want to know how they can get their animal to come out. To me, I'm like, you have to send me a picture. After a while, you can kind of see things the way the animal sees them. Like every single animal I have, that is what I have done. And I have seen the same results to varying degrees. Like, my Mandarin is not out every day. My file snake is not out every day, but they come out multiple times a week and multiple times a day sometimes if it's like an active period or if they're hunting. It is the formula. In my opinion, like I feel confident that with any species, if you did multi-levels and you had a hide on each one, you would see them using it, like without a doubt. In my mind, you would.
How do I see my pet snake more? I think this is a really common question for people, especially if you're new to keeping. People will go set up these large, elaborate setups, and they'll put their new snake in the enclosure, and then it hides, and you never see it, and maybe you see it only once a month or at feeding time, and that can be disappointing, especially because if you've picked an animal for its natural beauty, you want to be able to see it. So in this episode, I'm talking to Victoria Teague of Passionate Snakes. She has an incredible collection of a few boas, but also mostly colubrids. And I think colubrids quite often get pushed into the rack keeping territory because they are reclusive species. A lot of them are reclusive. They like to hide. So quite often people will say, if you don't keep them in the hide, if you keep them in a large display enclosure, you're not going to see them anyway, so there's no point. Victoria has cracked the code for how to keep incredibly reclusive, beautiful species of colubrids in display enclosures in a way that allows them to maintain their own security, but also allows you to visually see them. So this is a very simple tactics that she teaches throughout this episode that will allow you to see your pet snake on a much more regular basis. Whether it's a colubrid or not, or maybe it's a species of boa or python, doesn't matter. Any of these tactics that Victoria talks about in this episode can easily be implemented across different species, not just colubrids. And I think it's a very practical episode. So especially if you're a new keeper and you're wanting to learn how to make an enclosure so you can actually see your beautiful animal, then this is the episode for you. Let's jump into the episode. Enjoy. This podcast is all about improving your reptile husbandry. However, I know not everybody has the time or the money to go out and spend thousands of dollars doing custom builds. Thankfully, friend of the podcast, Josh Halter, aka the Bio Dude, is working hard to make better care more accessible. He makes turnkey bioactive kits for leopard geckos, ball pythons, tortoises, invertebrates, dart frogs, and the list continues to grow. He has spent years testing and perfecting these handcrafted substrates and dietary supplements to create the most effective products. If you visit thebiodude.com, you will see he is a proud supporter of both USARK and responsible reptile keeping, and there is an option to donate to either at checkout. Well, Victoria, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. You have just an incredible collection of animals. Every time I see pictures of you have this like aesthetic with your enclosures and the way you keep that it's just instantly, you can tell it's a Victoria enclosure when you see it. You're just like, oh, that's one of hers. And I just love the way you set it up, and we'll talk all about that because there's so much to get into there. But I'm curious, how long have you been keeping reptiles?
Since 2017.
Okay. So relatively new.
Yeah.
And what got you into it initially?
So like growing up, I was always a big dinosaur nerd. Like Jurassic Park was my favorite movie as a toddler, and just anything reptilian or like that ancient predatory type creature was just always something super fascinating to me because it's so different from us and mammals in general and the animals we normally interact with. So I had I was like a cat household, but there was also fish and hamsters and guinea pigs and birds and rabbits. So there was some of that exoticness growing up, but it wasn't reptiles until I was an adult and on my own and no longer living at home.
And what did you initially go pick up in 2017?
Yeah, so it started, I just walked into a reptile store one day, and there was always that deep curiosity, like I would really like to try this one day. But it was one of those things where it never just felt like the right time. Mm-hmm. But then they had like a rehome reptiles section, and there was a ball python there looking for a home. And they just really like talked me into it. And I am grateful for it because it's became such a huge part of my life. However, like if I could go back and do it, that's not the way I would do it. Because it was your typical pet store setup, a 40-gallon with your coconut fiber. It wasn't even the chips, it was just straight fiber and nothing else. A giant hide that was way too big for this teeny tiny little guy. The thermometers that stick to the glass and have the sticker on it and the adhesive and just a whole 9 yards of not great.
Yeah. The classic PetSmart setup.
Yeah. Um, quickly got roasted on social media. And however, I will give myself props for like immediately wanting to change everything and do better. Uh, but even then, like 2017 in comparison to today, like the things people talk about is just completely different. As
Mm.
far as complexity, like out the gate, what people are expecting for new keepers to automatically know and do in today in comparison to when I first got on the groups in 2017 is like really, really different.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's crazy how far things have come even in that short amount of time. Do you still have that ball python?
I do not. So at that
Okay.
time, I was still active duty in the military.
Mm.
And it became one of those things where I thought I was done, but I wasn't. So unfortunately, I did end up having to go on a deployment and having to rehome. So 10 out of 10, if you are currently active duty in the military, you might want to wait a little bit on getting reptiles if there's a possibility of you getting stationed somewhere else. Um, but in a way, I'm kind of grateful it happened that way because it gave me a chance to like really start over. So there was
Yes.
a period of time where I was doing nothing. I had no reptiles whatsoever, and I was doing nothing but researching and just continually being on forums because that fascination was still there, even though I no longer was capable of having one. Uh, and I just kept going down that rabbit hole of how creative I could get with it. And I was always someone who was very creative. So the aspect of setting up an enclosure and all the tweaking and fine tuning and all these different gradients, it was really, it almost became more fascinating to me, the enclosure design, than the animal itself
Mm.
in a way.
Yeah.
Not that I'm like not completely fascinated by the animal, but it was like the animal was on the cherry on top of me
Yes.
creating this.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's why I think that the fish keepers do really well is they sort of revere the setup and they have this incredible aquariums, and then the fish are really like this cherry on top, like you're saying. And so then, was your boa your first entry back in after the deployment was over and you knew you were no longer active?
Yes. So I got her in 2019. And
Okay.
I've had her since then, and all the animals I currently have, I have not rehomed anybody. Um, but yeah, she's massive now.
How big is she?
She's right about 6 foot, honestly, but
Okay.
yeah, she's just a beast. It's one of those things where I almost get weary when I see people online and they just get like a bunch of baby boas in the same year. And now here I am,
Yes.
like 6 years down the line with mine, and I'm like, she's actually a big animal. She
Yeah.
is not a small baby. And I totally see how people can fall in love with a little boa and end up with multiple little boas. And then, yeah, I have no intention of getting another big snake, to be honest with you, after having her,
Yeah.
because I just want to give her so much. You know what I mean? Like I want to give her so much room and so much opportunities, and she's just a big animal now. I know to
Totally.
some people 6 foot is like nothing, but I, as far as giving her the enclosure I want her to have as a 6 foot animal, like she can be the only big one I have for
Because
the ambition I have.
she's in a pretty large enclosure right now, right?
Yeah, she is. She is.
What
It's
what's the
really,
dimensions?
it's 7 feet long, 3 feet deep, and 4 feet tall. So I
Okay.
know most people are aiming for like that 8 by 4 by 4. So it's not quite an 8 by 4 by 4, although it's definitely my intention to exceed that in the future. But for how big she is now, it's amazing. Like she utilizes every inch. I'm really happy with the way I did the shelf layout and seeing her use like these multiple levels to it. It's just really interesting to watch her move around, especially now that she's larger. Just watching a bigger animal climb that way is really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, I can totally relate to that for sure. And then, so tell me a little bit about the journey of, because now you have this like almost eclectic collection of snakes and some really interesting species. We'll definitely dig into them more, but just did you got your boa? You know, that's a pretty classic first snake, especially if you're
Yeah,
someone
yeah.
that's a little bit deeper into the hobby. My boa was the same, my first snake. And then did you start branching out into colubrids right away? Like, did you, like, I'll tell you my experience. When I first got into snakes, boas were the only snake that I found interesting to look at. I don't know what it was. I was like, everything else I don't even like. I hated colubrids. I thought they looked weird. I don't know. I don't know why. And then slowly you start to develop a more respect and interest, and then suddenly your eyes are and your mind are open to other species. And then I started to be gravitated towards colubrids as well. So did you always have an interest in colubrids, or did that kind of come along the way?
Okay, so it's very similar to what you went through, except instead of not thinking, I always thought they were interesting, but I was intimidated by the
Mm,
difference. I was so comfortable in boa care that whenever people talk about colubrids and they talk about um, a lot of basking lamps, more so see basking lamps and such with colubrids versus boas. So like that was one thing. Another thing was, doing your winter cycling and them going down for a period of time for a few months at certain temperatures and having them go off feed due to XYZ. It just seemed like there was so many more variables for colubrids than boas. So I was a little intimidated at first. Um, Yet somehow, some way, my first colubrid was a Mandarin rat snake.
mm. I mean, they're hard to resist.
um, yeah, I still absolutely adore him. He was so good for being like my first colubrid, not in the typical way of like a corn snake and whatnot of like ease of care, but he just really took my keeping to the next level as far as really diving deep into that natural history. And just when you get into old world rat snakes, there's just this whole new like wow thing
Mhm.
to it when it comes to old world rat snakes, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of nice when you step up to a slightly more challenging species, and then you can apply what you've learned there onto a species that you feel like you had already mastered. You know, you feel like you were doing a really good job with the boa care, but then you can, once you've learned something like a Asian rat snake that's maybe a little more challenging to care for, you can then implement those things into your boa enclosure as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, my boa definitely taught me like this huge foundation that I was able to grow on, and I really I really like thank her for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Even though she went through all my stuff, like she went through 6 different enclosures within like 3 year time span because I was constantly upgrading and trying something new. She's had every different type of heating you can think of, every type of lighting. Like she was just my experiment, my
Yeah.
experiment animal. Bless her for just going along for the ride, but I have tried absolutely everything.
Well, that's what's good about boas is they are they're rugged enough to just handle that. You know that they have no issue with that. And so
Yeah.
I want to. So after you got your Mandarin rat snake, did it kind of just open a door to really just start to? Because I don't know how many snakes you have now. Maybe you could let us know. But it seems like you have a decent number. But did that kind of open the door to want to build a collection?
Yeah. So the reason I was so drawn to the mandarins was their natural beauty. And I was told from the get-go, like I had a lot of people tell me, oh, I don't think you're going to like mandarins because they hide a lot. You're not going to see it. It's just like owning an enclosure of dirt. Because at this point, people had seen me change and recycle through enclosures so much that they kind of thought me getting a mandarin was a bizarre choice because I would make this whole setup and then not ever get videos or pictures of the animal actually out doing things. Uh, but that's was completely false. Like I mean, don't get me wrong, he does spend most of his time buried, but there's multiple times a week that he is out I have pictures and videos of him climbing and using the shelves and wedging himself in the crevice to bask under the UVB I have in there. Like, and that was another thing that just really got me gung ho about colubrids was his behavior surprising me based off of what people told me I wasn't gonna like.
Mm, yes. And that was really the specific reason why I initially reached out to you to have you on, is because if you want to look at colorful and interesting pattern snakes, colubrids are your best place to start. There's like a million different things, but quite often that they are associated with tub keeping or rat keeping. And if you're somebody who doesn't want to keep that way, for somebody that wants to actually have a display set up, it can be intimidating because you pretty much all the information you encounter is that they're going to hide all day. So you're basically wasting your time and money setting up something nice. But then you go to your page and you have all these, quote unquote reclusive species that are set up in these beautiful enclosures. And yeah, maybe they're not out every second of every day, but you still have this ability to see them visually, which I think is amazing. Like, I'm sure that the experience with the Mandarin rat snake probably opened your eyes to just say, wow, I can go tackle more of these.
Oh, it really was, because I think it's really amazing when people pick animals based off of behavior and what they want in a pet. But at this point, with what I was looking for and what was intriguing to me about snakes themselves, a lot of it had to do with how they physically looked. And that's why I ended up with such an eclectic collection of these different patterns and all these different things, because I was just going based off of like my initial reaction, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if something really fascinated me, whether or not someone's going to tell me I'm going to see it all the time or I'm never going to see it at all didn't matter. I
Yes.
was
Yeah.
like, this species fascinates me, whether I see it once a month or once a week or once a day. I really, really am fascinated by this animal and I want to experience having it.
Mm-hmm.
Is how my collection came to be, and that's why it's so broad.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's not about keeping them in a way that's just totally keeper-centric, like I'm just going to force them to live in this setup so I can enjoy it. It's about understanding that you can actually set them up in a way that's best for the animal, but also the keeper. So I want to get into that. We're going to dig into that a lot, but I want to also cover something as well. That a couple months ago you had shared this, that you're going on this health journey and you have lost a bunch of weight, which is incredible. So congratulations on that. But the reason that I'm bringing it up is because I think it is one of the things that happens, I think, with animal keepers, especially when you start to have too many animals or a large group of animals, is it's easy to fall into the habit of thinking that you almost don't, there's no self-care for the keeper, and the keeper kind of becomes the secondary person in the relationship between you and the animals, and the keepers will start to sacrifice their own health and their own well-being for their animals. And in many ways, it sort of seems, yeah, that seems right, because they can't care for themselves and I need to go downstairs and do my thing with them. But, and so you might think, why should I spend time trying to maybe go for a quick walk or whatever it is to make myself feel a little bit healthier? But really there's dividends that pay off when you do that when you do apply some self-care to yourself. So I would love to know a little bit more about your health journey and if it has impacted just you and the reptile room in general.
Oh yeah. my journey towards like better health for myself has been insanely impactful on my keeping. I've always been a big project person, but the speed at which I can knock out a project has increased exponentially. Like, my motivation is through the roof, my energy is through the roof. I literally have like these laminated checklists that I made not only for myself but for my animals. Like, I have animal checklists that I go through every week, and then I also have a personal checklist that I go through every week for myself. Mm-hmm. And I found like the more I give myself the same care and attentiveness as I'm giving the animals, the more capable I am at taking care of them.
Yeah, I think that's you in some ways you almost want to conceptualize yourself as one of the animals you're taking care of.
Yeah, and it sounds really silly to say, but like, I don't know how else to describe it. Just giving myself some of the love that I give them has just made everything better.
Yeah.
as far as like just in every way, like my ability to creatively think of something or my ability to tackle a project, my physical capabilities of gathering branches and cutting them and preparing them to go in the cages or making a new background. It's just all the little things you think don't matter, or even like organizing your supply closet. Like I know I'm not the only one who has a closet full of extra snake stuff in case you need it. Like
Yes.
I just randomly tackled it one day and I'm like, I didn't know I had half this stuff.
Yeah.
Just the random motivation to do extra things that make an impact on your life.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to highlight it for people, just because it does quite often people can get stuck in not remembering to do that. And you realize how much more efficient and how much better it is for your animals if you do that, if you actually give yourself that time. Like you said, yeah, you're going to sacrifice maybe an hour of reptile room time for yourself, but it's going to pay off by being way more productive in 2 or 3 weeks when you do feel healthier. So did you just mostly increase, like do an exercise program? I'm just trying to think for somebody who like doesn't know where to start, if they're just like, I want to maybe have a little bit more of a self-care mentality.
Yeah.
What are some places to start?
Honestly, for me, like I haven't really gotten into the working out aspect yet. That's something I'm trying to plan with my husband. Like we're trying to do it together to kind of
Mm-hmm.
hold people accountable or ourselves accountable. So really it's just been about like nutrition and self-care and making sure I take my vitamins and just all those little things you think don't matter that actually make like a huge impact. I haven't really done any exercise yet. I've experienced the most weight loss and most mental clarity I ever have just by being conscious of what I'm putting in and on myself
Mm,
as far
yeah.
as food and products and all the things. It's just really, I don't know. To me, working out was always a chore,
Mm,
whereas me making myself a really healthy meal, I don't see that as a chore.
yeah.
So it was I've lost I think like 60 pounds and I
That's
haven't
amazing.
worked out at all. It's just been about taking care of myself that way. I mean, I definitely do want to start working out. Don't get me wrong, but if someone's intimidated about losing weight or getting in a healthier mindset and they think they need to spend all this time in the gym or all these extraneous workouts, it's really not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so true. People really do get intimidated by the exercise, or they don't have the time to do it. Like that's a big part of it. So can you implement other areas? So I think the checklist is a really good idea for people. So if anybody out there is feeling like, oh, I just don't feel as mentally clear or I have as much energy as I want to, it's okay to sacrifice some of that animal time to put it towards yourself as the keeper, because it's going to help you in not just the reptile room, but also if you need to think of it as doing something for your animals, then it is doing it for your animals if you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's been really, really cool experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, congratulations on that, because that is really incredible. And yeah, it's I always go through phases of you fall out of eating healthy and not being as active as you might like, and it's just amazing once you start eating better and being more active how much better you feel. Like you're just like, wow, I can't believe, like over the Christmas and New Year's I was eating horribly, and by the end of it I was like waking up feeling like I got hit by a truck. It's just like too much sugar, too many Oreos.
Everything.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah.
Like really just the mental clarity was the biggest for me.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, the weight loss is amazing, but just the mental clarity is something else. Even if I hadn't lost that much weight, just being able to
Thinking.
think and plan and feel good is just so rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, let's jump back to the colubrids. So you had mentioned that you almost do things in reverse, where quite often we recommend someone to go for an animal behavior wise that they want to see their pet kind of exhibit. But you were just almost saying like you're looking for things that jump out on the page or on the screen that you find just beautiful or interesting. Is that kind of how you started to pull into this eclectic collection?
Yeah, absolutely. And don't get me wrong, if someone's just trying to have one or two animals, they definitely should go based off behavior. But I
Mm.
felt like for what I wanted out of an animal, a reptile, a snake, behaviorally, I already had that with my boa.
Mm.
So at this point, it was like, this is my passion. This is my hobby. Like, I really want these animals in my life. They make me feel fulfilled. They make me feel like I have a purpose. It's like gardening and tending, like taking care of them takes care of me. And I just wanted a little bit more. Like, of course, everyone has their own limits. I'm currently at 8 animals.
Okay, that's reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah. There is plans for a few more, but only a few. I
Mm.
don't see myself ever surpassing like 15. 15 would be my absolute max. And I don't, and I'm not going to hit 15 just because I'm like, oh, that's my max number. Like, but I'm saying like that is where I would definitely cut myself off and be like, no matter what, we're done.
Yeah, yeah. You're full.
um, uh, yeah. And just so with my Mandarin, experiencing what I went through with him and the ways he surprised me, because I still went ahead and set him up the same way I would set up a quote unquote more active species or a more curious species. I set him up the exact same way, even though I fully knew that I probably wouldn't see him. And then he just completely surprised me. And that surprise became addicting. Like
Hmm.
every time I came in and I saw him out doing something, it was just like this rush of like, this is so awesome. I made this for him. He's using it. Like, people tell me I shouldn't be seeing this, but I'm seeing it. Like, and it made me feel like any species that intrigued me, I didn't have to worry about never seeing it. I didn't have to worry about owning a jar of dirt or a tub of dirt or an
Yeah.
enclosure of dirt. Like, I knew I was going to see any animal I got, whether it was once a month, once a week, once a day. Like, I was going to see it.
Do you want to list through the other species that you now have?
Yeah. So the boa imperator, and then my Mandarin rat snake. I have my Arizona mountain king snake, who is an absolute joy. And I have the Japanese rat snake, rhinoceros rat snake, my Potosi Mexican king snake, my African file snake, and then I just got a Brazilian rainbow boa.
So you took one out of left field there at the end.
I did. I did. People weren't expecting it. I even did like a little poll thing on Instagram and I was like, oh, I did a thing. What do you think it is? And everyone was voting rat snake or colubrid. And then I was like, plot twist, it's a boa.
So how did the boa end up there? Did you just got attracted to them and same sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I just love a beautiful animal. I'm
Yeah.
weak for a beautiful animal. And that's about as beautiful as it gets.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things where again I was like, oh my gosh. And I'm trying to have variety because there was multiple species that I was interested in that kind of had similar looks as far as being this mostly high red animal
Mm.
with black markings. So there was a few I was torn between. Like I was also heavily considering a bamboo rat snake, and I probably will get a bamboo rat snake at some point, honestly, because
Yeah, they're
I
cool.
love them so much. But also like the Dominican red mountain boa and then the
Mm.
Brazilian rainbow boa, like they're all different and they all have different behaviors. But
Yes.
as far as like in my mind, I really want a diverse collection based on appearance. And I felt like they were all kind of in that similar bucket as far as like high red with black detail.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, you,
Um,
you definitely have achieved, I would say, a high diverse visual room.
yes, yes. So ultimately, I chose the Brazilian rainbow boa. And so I got him. And again, everyone's telling me I'm never going to see him. And I have so many pictures of him climbing and coming out, and even just like the random poor quality videos that I post just in my story. So it's not on my main feed because it's not the greatest quality, but him just running around doing his own thing. And it's just so rewarding to see. Plus, he's absolutely gorgeous. Like
Yeah.
the iridescence is unreal. I know everyone says it about them, but when you actually see it in person, it's insane. Like I can't believe this is a real animal in my hands right now.
Yeah, it really is mind blowing. It's a very, and it doesn't change, as they get older. The iridescence is the same, so it's a really beautiful species.
But yeah, so basically every single one I've gotten just every time I see them out doing, even my African file snake, that's the youngest individual I have, and she is 5 months old. She's all over. And people told me she was just going to bury all the time. And I see her climbing. I see her sitting at the very top of the enclosure, at the top shelf on top of a hide rather than hiding under it. And it's just such, that feeling is so addictive that I'm just like, I love this. Like, just everything.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because there's probably so many people listening that have had species that they've come across in the past and they go, I exactly like you're saying, I don't want to keep in an enclosure that's just, a pile of dirt and you never get to see or experience the animal. So how do you go about setting up these display enclosures so you can maximize the security of the animal? You don't want to sacrifice that. You want the animal to feel secure and relaxed, but also so you're able to view them. And I'm curious if there's different tactics you've used across the different species, or is what you learned with the Mandarin rat something that you could have applied across the other ones and you're sort of getting the same result?
Yeah. So I am just the biggest fan of shelves and enclosures. Like, I cannot recommend them enough to people. Whether you really want that hyper realistic look where it's like a slab of rock on the wall, or if you're more so focused on just maximizing the space, so it's a literal U bracket on the wall where it's like it goes along the side, it goes along the back wall, and it comes back. It's that connection U shape.
Mm.
That is my absolute favorite. And it does not look the most natural as like a chunk of rock coming out of a wall. However, it just leaves no room wasted. Like, it is complete corner to corner, back to front, side to side. You have these different levels to it. And that one's my favorite for maximizing. And then also because it gives me complete freedom when it comes to branch placement as well, because I can use the shelves to prop the branches on rather than the branches being directly on the ground substrate floor. Like, if anyone ever really like it fully examines my enclosures, hardly any of the branches are actually on the ground. Like, they aren't touching. They're all mounted in some way or propped up along the elevated shelves so that they don't actually touch the ground. Because I want to maximize floor space while also maximizing the arboreal space at the same time, while also keeping things easy to maintain, easy to clean, easy to see. I get questions a lot if my enclosures are bioactive, and they aren't, although I do use live plants. And my plants are growing in the coconut husk, which is another question I get a lot. I literally just keep it moist so the roots don't dry out. So the area around the plant, make sure those chips stay nice and moist so the roots stay healthy. And then I also just sprinkle in worm castings every couple months as fertilizer. And my plants grow like crazy.
The best part about providing high-quality reptile husbandry is you get to develop a long-term relationship with your animal. Meet Jackson, my 18-year-old crested gecko. Jackson lives on the BioDudes Terrafauna substrate, which is one of their substrates that's specifically designed for warm biomes and humidity spikes. Like all other BioDudes substrates, it contains organic content to help support the plant life in Jackson's vivarium. It also holds moisture very well, which means humidity is never an issue, even in my dry climate. Another favorite of mine is the BioDudes Bug Grub. This is a supplement powder made from natural ingredients like carrots, beets, spirulina, oats, and potatoes. Everybody knows how important gut-loading feeder insects is, and this simplifies it for me and allows me to be confident when I feed both Jackson and my tarantulas that they're getting the nutrients they need to thrive. Also, if you have a lot of babies right now, this is a great way to help fortify the diets of neonatal reptiles. The BioDude has a ton of great educational content on both his YouTube channel and the website, all about bioactive care, and it's just one of those brands that's doing their part to push herpetoculture into a positive direction and give reptile keeping a better name. Really? So are you must be misting like almost every day then, like heavily into the soil, or?
No. So basically the easiest thing for me in the most simple way, and plus I feel like it's not wasteful, is every time I change water bowls, which is like every 2 days, 3 days max, I'm watering the plants with the water in that water bowl. And then I'm cleaning it because I use glass water bowls in all of my enclosures so they don't get like slimy or gross to the point where I wouldn't feel comfortable using that water for the plants. Like, yeah. So
yeah, that's smart. Yeah.
It's, I don't know. I mean, I just kind of experiment with absolutely everything, the plants included, because when I was getting the African file snake, if you read the care guides online that people recommend, uh, they kept talking about nostrils getting clogged from like dusty, loose substrates.
Right.
So for that enclosure in particular, I was like, I really want live plants, but I don't feel comfortable using soil because I keep reading all these guides and things about people having issues with clogged nostrils. And
Because
I
they're a
already,
fairly fossorial species, right? Like
yeah.
they will like, okay.
Which was, yeah. So it was kind of confusing to me how something can burrow, but also have these clogged nostril issues. But then we're also talking about substrates that are like manufactured and
Right.
packaged. It's not natural. Like, so, yeah. So that really presented me with a challenge of, I hope plants can just grow in coconut husk. Like, I wanted to try it. So I did. And I have a bonsai in there, uh, an umbrella tree in there, and a money tree, and they're all growing in just coconut husk.
Wow.
And
That's
like they're
amazing.
shooting out new growth and exceeding. It's not just they're surviving, like they are genuinely pushing out new growth at a rate that I would call high because I have a lot of plants. And yeah, it's it's worked out really well. So if anyone wants to try it, just make sure you keep it moist enough that the roots don't dry out. And then I just sprinkle worm castings every couple months, and it's just been really interesting for sure.
That's cool. So do you think that it's the shelving work that you think is kind of the key to your success, keeping these reclusive animals, like something like a file snake? I would think that you would never see that animal. It just seems like something that's going to be underground the whole time, just the way it looks, you know.
Yeah.
And I imagine, you know, you'd already mentioned you're seeing it, and it's I guess using the shelves. Like, do you think that's the key?
Oh, it was crazy because when I first put her in, she did not leave the shelf for
Mm,
like 2 weeks. She even went through a shed cycle and everything in a brand new enclosure and only stayed on the shelf and didn't move, like did not
really?
leave it. And it wasn't that she was just hiding in fear because she was going under it, under the hide on the shelf, but she was also changing what shelf she was on. So she'd be at the shelf at the very top or the shelf in the middle or the shelf at the bottom, but she would never be on the substrate slash ground level, whatever you want to call it. Every time I checked on her, she was never there. She was always on a shelf somewhere. And there was even times where she wasn't even under a hide on the shelf. She was just out in the open, peeking out. So those first 2 weeks, it wasn't like she was just cowering in the corner on the shelf. She was actively exploring and changing which level she was on. And I guess just the newness or the novelty of it, she just didn't want to leave. Like she never
Yeah.
didn't go to the ground floor, went through a whole shed cycle and everything on a shelf. Now that she's been on the in the enclosure for a while, it's like 50-50. Like half the time I find her on a shelf and half the time she's on the ground floor buried. Just depends. But she comes out every night. Every
Are
night.
her shelves, are they just kind of the wood ones that you've plugged in, or are they the
They're
fake?
foam.
They're foam. Okay.
Yeah, so all of my Colubrids enclosures, these shelves are made of insulation foam that I use like a heat gun. So it's adds that extra durability and hardness, as well as closing all those microscopic pores and holes so you can really paint it and get an even finish with less amount of paint. You're not wasting as much. Um, I do that for all of them because they're low weight animals. I don't have to worry about things collapsing. Um, and I do that U shape or an L as far as like my favorite shelf design. And then
Yeah.
I use them to weave the branches going up, above, and down and all over.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you have some amazing pictures of just. I think mainly I'm thinking of the Mountain King, just kind of wedged in, and it just looks so natural. You can just imagine that's exactly what they do in the wild. They're wedging themselves in these shelves, and it looks like it's a heavily utilized piece of the enclosure.
Oh yeah. It's it's genuinely where I see my snakes the most without literally having to search for them.
Mm.
It's they're on a shelf, and I feel like keeping these animals would be a lot less appealing and a lot more boring if I did not have these shelves. because they just utilize it so much. And having that, for me, I prefer a flat shelf, for the ease of cleaning. It's still important to me to keep it clean, be able to clean waste very easily, but also by having a flat surface that gives me complete freedom as far as what type of hide I want to put on there. So
Right.
whether it's an empty coconut or it's a piece of cork bark or it's literally a black rectangular, your classic reptile hide, or even a DIY one that I made myself, like it gives me complete freedom to make any shape, any size hide I want. And it gives the animal a chance to build confidence being on a shelf without having to be in the open.
Mm.
And I think that's something a lot of people miss because they'll tell me that they've added shelves to their enclosures, but the animals aren't using it. And my first thing is like, is there a hide on there? Right. Because I feel like it's baby steps. You can't just give them a shelf and be like, okay, now you're going to lay out on this and have no fear and you're going to adjust right away. And I'm sure there are animals out there that do that. But for the most part, it's not like that. And you kind of have to ease them into being comfortable to do that. And for me, that's hides. So every shelf and every enclosure has a hide on it.
Okay.
And that is how they build confidence that way. And then it just over time, it progresses to they're just laying out in the open and they know that they have that safe place that makes them feel secure right next to them if they get overwhelmed or overstimulated by whatever's happening outside of the enclosure that they can go into right away.
Well, and I
Versus,
imagine. Oh, go
sorry,
ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to add like versus feeling like the only safe place is on the ground because they can
Right.
burrow and that's where the hides are and everything like that.
Exactly. Yeah, and I can imagine too, just to simplify for people, because quite often the styrofoam stuff is maybe a little bit intimidating. People don't want to paint and whatnot. So it's just putting boards in as shelves, but you could layer them so you have several kind of almost stacked on top of each other, and those almost would act like a hide themselves if they're kind of wedging themselves between two shelves that are relatively low. It's amazing how much more space an enclosure has once you start adding 3 dimensions to the sides, more so than just like the fake rock background, which looks really cool as well, but it's not as usable as something that the snake can actually rest on.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another thing I run into a lot when people send me pictures and that's honestly the question I get the most is when people reach out to me, they want to know how they can get their animal to come out. That
Mm.
is like the number one question I get. Um, and when they send me pictures, because to me, I'm like, you have to send me a picture because I just have after a while, you can kind of see things the way the animal sees them. And I can be like, okay, that there needs to be smaller, or you need to have more surface area there because that animal's too big for that little ledge, or vice versa, that's too big for that little animal, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, just shells are really, really game changing. Like if you really want to get more enjoyment out of having snakes in general, I highly recommend the multi-levels and adding hides on them so they have an acclimation period.
And that template is something that you've replicated across different species from different places on Earth, and it seems to be just as effective regardless
Oh
of
yeah,
where they're from.
universally. Like every single animal I have, that is what I have done, and I have seen the same results to varying degrees. Like, my Mandarin is not out every day. My file snake is not out every day, but they come out multiple times a week and multiple times a day sometimes if it's like an active period or if they're hunting. Versus, my Japanese rat snake, my rhino rat snake, those guys are out all the time just in general.
Yeah.
And that's kind of more so in line with their species specific behavior. Whereas the Mandarin and the file snake are more typically, you're never going to see them, but I am seeing them quite a bit. So it's just, yeah, I mean, it is the formula in my opinion. Like I feel confident that with any species, if you did multi-levels and you had a hide on each one, you would see them using it, like without a doubt. In my mind, you would. It may
Well,
not be as often as you want, but it will happen.
I think that's good news for a lot of people because, like I said, there's so many different species of colubrids, especially that are so beautiful, and you just think, oh, why would I buy something that I literally never see? But if there's a way to do it, then that'll be great news for people. And what about for feeding? Like, have you had? Because that's another thing. If it's a very complex environment and they're kind of hiding, do you have any issues getting the prey item to them?
So I don't have like a set feeding schedule, nor do I have a set feeding time. And honestly, for my convenience, I feed during the day.
Yeah.
And I have no refusals, no anything. The most I have to do is for the Mandarin and the file snake because, well, the file snake, it depends on if she's on a shelf or not. If I see her on a shelf, I don't really need to do anything. But if she is burrowed, like my Mandarin typically is, I do have to dig a little bit to find out the general area they are in. And then I will present it because they all eat off tongs. But yeah, I've tried doing, especially with my Mandarin, he isn't a picky eater, but he is a picky eater at the same time. He eats frozen thawed no problem, but he won't eat it if it's been sitting too long.
Okay. So you want to make sure
I can't
you're not
feed him. Yeah.
Gotcha.
If I drop feed him, he won't 50% of the time. Sometimes he will, but it's a chance that I don't want to take if it just means I can get 100% success rate if I just figure out where he is and present it, he's going to take it. Versus if I think he's over here and I'm just going to leave it here overnight and then he doesn't find it and then I've wasted a rodent, which is what I don't want to do.
Yeah. I hate wasting rodents too. You just feel so bad. You're like, oh.
I do.
Like wasted life.
Exactly.
Now, what about cleaning? You'd mentioned that you prefer a flat shelf for ease of cleaning, and that's another area where, especially with colubrids, people get worried about is the amount of mess that they make. They poop and pee a lot, and that typically is one of the other reasons that they get pushed towards tub keeping is because they can be cleaned easier, I guess. So, do you find challenges with cleaning?
So, my enclosures have a very complex look about them, but if you really stare at them, they aren't as far as like the layout, because all of my shelves are flat. The texture is always in the front. Like this heavy rock texture is always what is presented to you in the front as the viewer or on camera, whatever. But if you're actually looking at the top of the shelf itself, it is mostly smooth. There is some texture for grip, but it is mostly smooth. So I can literally just take a moist paper towel and easily wipe away any waste. And that is especially important for animals like my Japanese rat snake, who is just a menace, like anywhere and everywhere. Like the branches are covered, the shelves are covered, the hides are covered, the water bowl's covered. He's just wherever. He has no routine, no object is safe. It's all happening. Like, so for him especially, and just, I mean, there's some that I rarely have to ever like scrub a background for. And if I do have to scrub a background, I use like a soft bristle brush and chlorhexidine, and you just scrub it off, rinse it thoroughly, and you're good to go. I have original dry lock backgrounds that are like 6 years old now, and I have scrubbed them and watered them and all these things, and they just look almost brand new as the day I made them. The only time I ever have to repair damage on a dry lock background is if I'm trying to force a branch in that doesn't really fit. And then it kind of nicks the background, you know what I mean? But that's literally the only time I've ever had damage on these backgrounds. I even, for the Brazilian rainbow boa, the enclosure he's in now is the enclosure I had that I was establishing my baby colubrids in. And I straight up took a mini chainsaw to it, a hammer, all a drill with like the whole bit on it to gut that background and made a whole new one for him. And that was wild. I did not expect so much resistance.
Shows you how hard it is. Yeah.
I literally had to use a mini chainsaw to cut these chunks of foam and dry lock and everything. It was honestly impressive. It made me feel good. I was like, this was not going anywhere.
Yeah, that is structurally sound. Yeah. Well, and I almost think that one of the reputations of keeping colubrids, like I said, is they're messy, but it's almost like that happens when they're kept in smaller tubs because they almost have nowhere to poop or pee. They're sort of defecating on the walls, but I mean, I find that with my Japanese rat snake as well, he'll go anywhere, but it's not like it's like smeared all over the glass and things. It's just, it's contained to an area. And like you said, you're just going to miss down a branch if he gets it on a branch or pull out some substrate, whatever it is. It's almost like keeping them in a hyper clean environment makes it seem like they're messier than they are in a way.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like we all have those days where, you're sick or things happen and you just can't clean that day, even though you see something there. And that's another great thing with these enclosures because, like, you and I had talked about, we both have been getting over some sickness lately. But with
Mhm.
these type of enclosures, they can defecate one spot and that's not going to hinder their health. It's not going to affect the quality of the air. It's not going to make them run through it because there's nowhere else to go. Like, they're not going to be covered in it. They have so much extra space, so many extra levels and areas to choose from that it's not going to affect their health if I need one more day to recover or
Exactly.
do something and then I will clean this tomorrow.
Totally. Yeah. It's not an emergency.
Yeah, whereas with a small tub like setup, that might be an emergency because you're having this poor airflow. And now let's say they also knocked over a water dish. Now you have a humid, steamy tub of
Like ammonia.
waste and
Yeah.
ammonia. And no doubt that could affect the respiratory system or cause a bacteria flare up, scale rot, whatever. Like, no doubt.
Exactly, exactly. So, speaking of air quality, I'd love to talk about the top of the enclosures. I'd like to know: are you running a top screen, and then what are you doing for lighting and heating? And is it relatively similar across most of the species you keep?
So a lot of my enclosures are stacked. So most of my heating and lighting is internal,
Okay.
except for my rhinoceros rat snake and the Japanese rat snake. They do have screen top enclosures that I had built myself. And I do have like a very thin sheet of plexiglass on top of that screen where there isn't a lamp or whatever to try to hold some of that humidity in. But because they are enclosures I made myself, there is, tiny gaps here and there. So there is no lack of like air quality as far as those.
Yeah, yeah.
With my other enclosures, I do like the top ventilation and the bottom, a mix of both. And I do have a couple PC fans. However, I don't always use them. It just kind of depends. It's mostly for my Arizona mountain king snake because sometimes I overwater and it gets a little bit too humid in there than what I would like it to be. So that's when I turn the fans on. It's that type of scenario.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah.
And then for lighting, do you basically run a similar setup? Lighting and heating, I guess.
Yes. So every enclosure has a halogen basking bulb, various wattages based off needs. And then everyone has an Arcadia UVB. I use the Shade Dweller on everyone because
Hmm.
it's safe, it's easy, it's like the go-to one. And then I also have an LED strip for the plants because every enclosure has live plants.
Okay. So yeah, you run a basically full spectrum.
Yes.
Another thing that a lot of those species, not necessarily people would say you need, but that also could be one of the extra reasons that you see additional activity is just them basking under the heat bulb or going up to the UV or whatever it is, or
Yeah.
even the visual light as well.
I mean, a routine's a routine, even if they're only coming out when the lights come off. Like I see
Exactly.
animals regularly because of the schedules that are maintained within the enclosure. I mean, sometimes they come out during the day and that's a pleasant surprise, but most of the time when the lights go off, I can walk into my room and just from the ambient light of my house, I can see the animals are out doing things.
Yeah.
Just because it's not when the enclosure lights are on, that doesn't make the fact that they are out utilizing things any less significant.
Yeah, oh, totally, exactly. Yeah, yeah. There's like little behavioral things. I know with my Japanese rat snake, if I heavily missed his enclosure, it's clockwork. He will be poking his head out of his hide within like 3 or 4 minutes. It's just like there's like little cues, and whether it's lights going off or whatever it is, the animals pick up on it, and it's healthy for them to have those, be able to rely on some routine.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that bothers me a little bit sometimes when people discuss, certain species not needing things or not utilizing things. Just because you don't see it happening doesn't mean it's not,
Yes. Yeah.
right? You could be in bed and your animal is just having an absolute Zoom session, just going all over the place, and you wouldn't know. So does that mean you need to put it in a smaller enclosure or box or whatever because you aren't there present when they decide to do things? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, I'm sure there's all kinds of things my animals do that I miss out on, and that's okay because I give them the opportunity to do so. And whether I get to see them do it or not doesn't make it any less important to me that they have that opportunity.
Yes, yeah, that's very well said. Is there any other things with keeping these type of species in larger display enclosures, like tips or things that you think are important, or do you think we covered most things for folks that are wanting to replicate the success that you've had?
Just multi-level design,
Okay.
really maximizing those opportunities, and just please put hides on the shelves. Please, they don't have to always be there if that's like something you really don't want, but at least until the animal is really comfortable, you have a hide on that shelf, because
Yes.
it
Yeah.
makes all the difference in the world if they have somewhere they feel they can be safe at while also still being visible.
I think that's perfect. And what's nice about that is this is not a complicated prescription for people. Like you're not doing this crazy like seasonality, doing different temperature swings or light, whatever it is to try to mimic exactly the natural habitat to try to make them act more naturally. It's just simply providing more structure into their enclosure. That's it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Now as far as moving forward, you'd mentioned that there's a few other species that you may pick up along the way. Are there any other kind of immediate things that you're going to gravitate towards, or projects that you have in mind, or like where do you see the reptile room in 3 or 4 years?
Ooh. There's so many things I hope to accomplish, and I don't want to like say too many things, and then if they don't happen, I don't want people to be disappointed. But or disappointed along with myself. I'll be disappointed, someone else will be disappointed. Like that's a double lose. But
Yeah, yeah.
uh we are in I currently rent, so there is a limit to my creativity and capabilities because of renting. So our next step in general is to own a home, and we're planning to do that within the next year, which will really give me the freedom to take things to the next step that in having the reptile room I see in my head. Um, but as far as like a smaller type of thing, my husband is enamored with my rhinoceros rat snake, and he wants to get him a female. So that is the most immediate thing in the works.
Is he a reptile person at all, or is he just
No,
grown to love it because of you?
yeah, my rhinoceros rat snake's name is Minnow, and he just he just adores him. I don't know how else to describe it. He's never really been into any of the snakes. Like he thinks they're cool, but it's not his thing. But every time he comes in this room, he's like straight to Minnow's enclosure. He wants to see what Minnow's doing, or half the time Minnow's already looking at you
Yeah.
and seeing what you're doing. So uh he's just enamored with him, and he started looking more into the species in general, which was adorable, and he saw that they could be cohabbed under the right conditions. So he really wants to get Minnow, quote unquote, a girlfriend. So that's what's happening.
All right. Very cool. I like it. That's
I'm not
awesome.
going to force anything. I'm not going to do anything the animals don't want to do. But yeah, we are going to get another rhinoceros rat snake. That's for sure.
Very cool. And one other thing I wanted to talk to you about as well as we wrap up is you've also I don't know how long, but you've been involved with advancing herpetological husbandry on Facebook for a while. So you've kind of taken another step, a role of mentorship and helping other people. When did you start being? I don't know what to call it, an admin or a moderator. I kind of forget now. How long have you been doing that for?
Oh, that admin for advancing herpetological husbandry. I've been a, at least a year,
Okay.
if not a little longer.
Yeah. That's pretty cool, right? Like you're it's not like you've been keeping for 40 years.
Yeah.
You've just been able to you've been able to have success in a domain that not everybody does, and keep animals in a way that, again, the typical go-to is very simple tub setups.
Yeah.
And it's cool that now you have an opportunity to help mentor people.
I'm definitely a niche as far as like the admin team. Like there's only certain things I will pipe in or I feel comfortable discussing, because I'm not an expert and I'm never going to claim myself to be an expert. But if someone wants to know about what I've been doing or the experience I've had with the animals I have, I am more than happy to talk and shoot ideas, but I'm never going to claim to be an expert or like I have one of this and now I know everything there needs to know about the species. I'm never going to claim to be that. And that I feel like that's impossible to be anyways, because we're discovering new things all the time. But yeah, if people are curious about my experience and things I have done and the things I think are successful as far as keeping, then absolutely, I would love to have a conversation. I'll talk to you all day long about it. But so that's where I fit on the admin team. I'm definitely not someone who's been in the hobby for 40 years or anything like that, but I do keep some species that most people don't, and I do have certain experiences with things that most people don't, and that's where I come in. That's me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Victoria, this was a fantastic conversation, and I think it's one that's so valuable because we have just these incredible, beautiful species that I think are often not even overlooked, because a lot of people obviously keep, North American colubrids and old world or European colubrids, but there's, I think, something missing as far as for a while last summer, I was really going down a North American colubrid phase, and it was just so hard to find any good inspiration for how to keep, because you just kind of default to people who keep large amounts in racks, and you don't want to put an animal in a display enclosure just for yourself. And I think you're doing it the right way, and I think this is a huge amount of positive information can come from yourself as well as this episode. So thank you so much. Is there anything that we didn't say today that you wanted to wrap up with? And it's okay if you don't. I just want to make sure I've allowed you to say everything you wanted to.
Not off the top of my head. Just if anyone ever wants to have a conversation, I'm more than happy to.
Awesome. Can you let everybody know where they can find you online?
I pop up a lot on the Facebook groups, and you'll see me there as Victoria Teague. But mostly as far as documenting my own animals and my own journey and the things I'm doing, I do that through Instagram, which is Passionate Snakes.
Awesome. And of course, that will all be in the show notes for everybody. So Victoria, thank you so much for being a guest and sharing your wonderful information. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, that is the end of that episode. Victoria, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast and sharing all that wonderful information. I think that is incredibly practical and useful information, and it's going to allow people who are maybe intimidated by some of the colubrid species that they want to keep because of the beauty, but are also thinking, why would I go to the lengths of setting up all these enclosures when everybody's saying that you should just keep them in a tub because they're going to hide anyway? I love the fact that you seem to unlock the secret to making this work to allow us to actually visually see our pet snakes without putting them under a ton of stress or unnecessary stress. Listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, thank you so much for listening. Please consider sharing it. This is another one that I think many people, like I said, how do I make my pet snake more visible is a very common question that people have. So sharing this one will find new listeners and allow people to enjoy keeping their snakes more, which I think is at the end of the day is the goal, which is both beneficial for both the keeper and the snake, of course. If you're looking for more information on the podcast, you can head to animalsathomenetwork.com. If you'd like to support the podcast financially, you can do that at patreon.com/animalsathome. And I believe that is it for this episode, everybody. I will catch you in the next one.